In the early 1980s, at a research station in Antarctica, a British scientist named Joe Farman kept getting a number he didn't believe. He and his team had been measuring the ozone in the sky above them for years. Quiet, patient work, the kind nobody notices. And the number was falling. Not by a little, by enough that Farman assumed something was wrong. Not with the sky, but with his equipment. The instrument was old. Old instruments drift. So he ordered a new one and waited for it to tell him the first had been broken. It didn't. The new instrument read the same thing. The ozone above Antarctica really was disappearing. And no one yet understood why. To see why that mattered, you have to know what ozone actually does. High above us, far above the clouds, there's a thin layer of a gas called ozone. It isn't much. If you gathered it all at the surface, it would be no thicker than a couple of stacked coins. But that thin layer absorbs a large share of the sun's ultraviolet radiation, the high-energy light that damages living cells. Ozone sits between us and a great deal of that radiation, quietly, all the time. Thin the layer, and more of that ultraviolet light reaches the ground. That's what Farman's numbers were describing. Not a local glitch. A gap opening in something that protects almost everything alive. In May 1985, Farman and two colleagues, Brian Gardner and Jonathan Shanklin, published their findings in the journal Nature. Their paper described a large, seasonal loss of ozone over Antarctica. It became known, in plain language, as the ozone hole. At first, some found it hard to accept that 3 people at one station had spotted something this big. But the following year, NASA confirmed it from orbit. Satellite instruments showed the same thing from space. The loss wasn't a measurement error, and it wasn't small. It stretched across an entire continent. The finding mattered because it turned a theoretical worry into a visible fact. Something we were doing was changing the atmosphere of the whole planet. And now there was a picture of it. The cause turned out to be a family of chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons, CFCs. They were used widely in refrigeration, in air conditioning, in aerosol sprays, around the world. They were, in most ways, useful chemicals, stable, cheap, safe to handle. That stability was the problem. CFCs were so durable that they drifted, intact, all the way up into the stratosphere, where sunlight finally broke them apart, and the chlorine they released began destroying ozone. This wasn't a complete surprise to everyone. More than a decade earlier, 2 chemists, Mario Molina and Sherwood Rowland, had predicted that CFCs could damage the ozone layer. At the time, it was a warning on paper, argued over and far from settled. Years later, that work would win a Nobel Prize. But in the 1970s, it was mostly a hypothesis, waiting for evidence. Farman's readings were part of the evidence arriving. So what was actually at stake? If the ozone layer kept thinning, more ultraviolet radiation would reach the surface year after year. And that carries real consequences. More ultraviolet exposure raises the risk of skin cancer and of cataracts, the clouding of the eye that leads to blindness. It can damage crops. It can harm the small organisms at the base of ocean food chains. None of this was the end of the world. It's important to be accurate about that. It was a slow, rising cost, spread across health and farming and ecosystems, that would grow for as long as the layer kept thinning. The question was whether anyone would act before that cost became permanent. And here is the part we tend to forget. They did act. In 1987, countries negotiated an agreement called the Montreal Protocol, a plan to phase out the chemicals that were destroying ozone. It didn't fix everything at once, and not every nation signed on the first day. But over the years that followed, it grew and strengthened until eventually every country in the world had joined it. That's worth sitting with for a moment. On most global problems, the world does not agree. On this one, over time, it did. The protocol set out to remove CFCs from the products they were used in and to replace them with alternatives. Slowly, production wound down. The flow of new ozone-destroying chemicals into the atmosphere began to shrink. But this is not a story where the problem ends the moment people decide to fix it. CFCs are patient. The ones already released stay in the atmosphere for decades before they break down. So even after the world stopped adding new ones, the damage already in the sky had to run its course. There's another complication. The size of the ozone hole changes from year to year, and not only because of chemistry. Weather high in the atmosphere matters too. A cold, stable polar winter can deepen the hole. A warmer, more disturbed one can shrink it. So any single year can look better or worse than the trend beneath it. That's why scientists are careful. They don't point to one good year and call it victory. They watch the long line across decades. And there was a reminder that the work can't be taken for granted. Years after the ban, scientists detected an unexpected rise in one banned CFC, traced largely to Eastern Asia. A sign that an agreement like this has to be watched and enforced, not just signed. So where does that leave us now? The chemicals that destroy ozone have fallen substantially, by about a third in the Antarctic stratosphere from their peak around the year 2000. And the layer is responding. Recent years have brought some of the smaller ozone holes seen in decades. The measurements now point consistently in the same direction. The ozone layer is recovering. But recovering is not the same as fixed. The full return of the Antarctic ozone layer to its 1980 condition isn't expected until around the 2060s. Most of the people who signed the first agreement will never see it finished. The children alive when it recovers haven't been born yet. That's the part of this story worth keeping. The people who noticed the problem couldn't see the solution. The people who agreed to fix it won't live to see it fully done. The result was set in motion by one generation and collected quietly by another. It's a slow way to solve a problem, but the sky above Antarctica is, measurably, on its way back. And it's worth remembering that we've done this once before.